This winter sun is the best. But the light is terrible to record a video, so here we go. Hello friends, my name is Hierarquirization and today I'm going to talk about the origins of the gods. Well,
what?
Aren't you going to say something?
Of course not.
Right.
Third part.
For goodness sake. Today Mr. Tico is not here with us because, well, he is bathing in the sun. And I will leave him to it because, well, it's a great day and just leave him be to his business. Well, if you haven't seen the other videos, you can always go and check the first part and the second part in here, and of course, if you can, please subscribe.
Hey, what's this?
I'm just playing with it, Mr. Thorstein.
Well, I didn't like it.
In the previous video, we left the Neolithic period behind and we started to walk towards the Chalcolithic, which is the period between the Neolithic and the Bronze Age, the period where our ancestors started the process of metal working, mostly copper. This metal was the chief substance to be used in the manufacture of tools and weapons. Now, before I really start this video, I would like to do as I did in the previous video, to answer your questions. But this time I've picked only one question, which I thought it was important. Well, are there more Norse deities related to fertility? Well, of course. There is the goddess called Gifjon or Gifjun, which is the goddess associated with fertility, agriculture and the plow. And there is, of course, Sif, Thor's wife, the goddess of grain and fertility. And finally, there is Freya, the goddess of sex, love, beauty, war and death, which shows her importance throughout the ages, the historical ages, since the Paleolithic all the way to the Bronze Age, which we are talking about today. And the goddess, or one of the few Norse goddesses associated with magic, spell working, well, satyr in general. Now, finally, let's start this video talking about the Bronze Age. Do you remember where we left off, Mr. Thorstein?
Yes. Something about fertility, the rain, the weather, and of course the mighty Thor.
Yes, that's right. Sort of. Would you like to tell us more about it?
Me? No, of course not. I leave it to you.
Well, the Bronze Age marks a great discovery. By smelting copper with tin, you can create an harder metal, a stronger metal. Bronze, of course. Now, tin and copper weren't easy to get. Our ancestors started to spread throughout the land and throughout the known world in search for their precious metals, copper and tin, to create their bronze tools and weapons. The civilizations with the knowledge in how to control fire and with it tame metal into creating better tools and better weapons had a great advantage towards all the other neighboring communities and other civilizations who still didn't have this knowledge. The Bronze Age is the age of power, warfare, metallurgy and the hierarchirization of the societies. With so much food and other supplies that could be created and of course the surpluses of agriculture, there was a need to protect the communities from neighboring communities, but there was also the need to attack them. This was a quest for power, a quest for control and to take the resources of other communities. So there was also the need to create new tools specifically designed to kill people. Now, during the Bronze Age was a specific, brutal age, but this doesn't mean that all the other ages before that, which I have talked about in the previous videos, weren't as violent. Violence has always been part of the human condition. It has always been part of the human history. Although during the Bronze Age, violent people were just getting better at it. During the Bronze Age, the communities and settlements changed a lot. Fortifications were a matter of necessity, and so was attacking other communities. So it's precisely during the Bronze Age that art engraved on stone also changed. If you have seen the previous videos, you will notice that art engraved on stone also changed, but from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, there was always an animal contest. There was also the hunting and, well, the depiction of animals in general. Of course, in the Neolithic, people started to worship the sun and the weather because of agriculture. They needed fertility, but still the animal element was still there. But during the Bronze Age, all of that disappears. From north to south, from east to west, a great emphasis is placed on the warrior culture, and we see a lot of engravings of weapons, warriors and warrior deities. During the Bronze Age, sacrifices became increasingly important, and it wasn't just sacrificing armor and weapons by placing them underneath stones or thrown into the rivers or swamps, but also the sacrifices of humans and animals. So there was the need for blood and to appease the gods of war and death. So in a world of violence, the warrior cult became much more popular. In a world of violence, the gods of war and death became much more important. So, as you may have guessed, during the Bronze Age, worshipping deities very similar to Odin from the Norse mythology was becoming much more popular. This doesn't mean that people stopped worshipping all the other deities. People still worshipped solar deities and fertility deities and so on, but during the Bronze Age, deities associated with war and death were much more important. Yes, I have said Odin, because before he became the deity we know today, the god of wisdom and the runes and the Allfather, he was the god of war and death, and also a warrior sacrifice. He was a very brutal god, a very violent god. But on another video I will talk about the cult of Odin, because it seems that people forgot that this deity during the Iron Age all the way through the Viking Age, he wasn't a famous god, and only a small group in the society worshipped him because he was a god related to war and warrior sacrifice and death, and it was a very violent deity, which is why I have picked him as an example of the types of deities who were worshipped during the Bronze Age. But about Odin on another video. Suffice to say that during the Bronze Age, deities very similar to Odin in his warrior version were much more praised. During the Bronze Age, another deity to be worshipped was one very similar to the Norse god Tyr, the god of war, heroic sacrifice and glory, and of course the god of victory. Although in fact Tyr and his ancestor from the Bronze Age were much more praised by warriors in general. For instance, Odin was only worshipped by a small group within the warrior community, while Tyr and all the other gods of war similar to Tyr were worshipped by warriors in general. Tyr and his ancestral deities had many names, such as Teus, Zeu and Thiwas, all gods connected to war and sacrifice and law, but also connected to the sun and to creation. Gods much more similar to the Greek Zeus and the Roman Jupiter. So as you can see, Tyr and his ancestors from the Bronze Age were much more praised and much more important than other deities connected to war. And I have to return to Odin. You can see that Odin was firstly associated with war and death, while Tyr had many other fields of expertise. Of course, later Odin became a god connected to creation as well, but that was during the medieval times, so Tyr was much more important than Odin in an ancestral past before the Viking Age, in an ancestral past probably beginning in the Bronze Age and all the way through the Iron Age. During the Bronze Age, domesticating horses and using them for war became highly important. Horses pulled chariots, which were used for war and religious ceremonies. We start to see chariots depicted on the art engraved on stone during the Bronze Age. The gods themselves started to use chariots. It was a symbol of power, wealth, and technological progress. And of course, later, even Thor, Freya, Suna, and so on, the Norse gods, also started to use chariots, a gift from the Bronze Age. During the Bronze Age, settlements became much more complex and chaotic, and there was a need to create new laws and regulations to protect the people and to prevent the population from destroying the cities and destroying themselves from within. It was bad enough to live in fear from attacks from the outside, let alone from attacks on the inside. And this was the time when deities very similar to the Norse god Forseti, for instance, started to be praised. Forseti is the law speaker, the god associated with justice, and the god who acts as a judge to decide the outcome of a dispute. So gods such as Forseti or his ancestors from the Bronze Age, gods associated with the cities and the state, the laws and justice and so on, were very important, not only to implement and enforce the law, but also to create peace and to create bonds of friendship through oaths. And speaking of oaths, Hulr, or his ancestor from the Bronze Age, was also a deity to be praised during the Bronze Age. So if you have seen the other videos, especially the first video about this subject, I speak about Ullr as a Paleolithic deity or his ancestor of that time, because Ullr is associated with hunt and bow hunting and the wilds, but he was never forgotten, so he became a very important god to whom people praised when taking oaths. So during the Bronze Age and in all those gods associated with law and bonds of friendship and oaths, Hulr or his ancestor was there for sure. Another god of the Bronze Age to be worshipped was one very similar to Bragi, the Norse god of poetry and eloquence. The Bronze Age is also the age of proto-writing. Words became very important, languages written down, knowledge written down. Only through words can we come to an understanding with our enemies and our allies, and that is why Bragi was the emissary of the gods. And during the Bronze Age, Bragi, or his ancestor of that time, was a very important deity to make peace with our enemies or to create stronger bonds of friendship with our allies. So during the Bronze Age, gods very similar to Bragi, Hulr, Tyr and Forseti were probably the gods much more praised during that time than any other deity connected to fertility or sun deities or any other kind of deities. During the Bronze Age was the time of warfare and was the time to create allies and also to create enemies and fight them. It was a very brutal age, and very violent, of course. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and please subscribe to watch more videos. All the links to my social media are down below at the description. Thank you for watching, and tack för idag!